In this presentation, we'll continue our exploration of anthropological approaches to material life by looking at a key way human beings have adapted to particular environments in order to procure the resources they need to sustain life. Here, we'll concentrate on different types of production systems. We've already had an introduction to economic anthropology in the previous module on globalization, but let's review economic anthropology before we turn to production and exchange systems. First, what's an economy? At its most basic level, an economy is a cultural adaptation to an environment, a set of ideas, practices, and technologies that enables a group of humans to use the available land, resources, and labor to satisfy their needs, and if organized well, to thrive. We can refer to an economic system as a set of adaptations that humans have used to provide food, water, and shelter to a group of people through the production, distribution, and consumption of foodstuffs and other goods. We've already looked at the world capitalist system and globalization. Let's look here at some other economic systems that anthropologists have studied. In broad terms, economic anthropologists study the systems of production, distribution, and consumption. You already know something about the production, distribution, and consumption of t-shirts in the global economy. Production refers to how goods and services are made and how people are organized to make them. Distribution has to do with how goods and services circulate through various forms of exchange. Consumption is about how people use goods and services and to what uses those goods and services are put, and finally, what they mean. Here, we'll look primarily at adaptation to environments and at food production systems. Gosh, how do I study economics like an anthropologist? Like anthropology itself, economic anthropology is relativistic. That means that we're skeptical about universalizing claims of any type. Empirical. So economic anthropologists prefer empirical data gathered through direct observation to censuses, surveys, and similar data. It's adaptationist. That is, economic anthropologists assume that economic processes are historically contingent, not universal. It's comparative. It assumes that economic practices will exhibit different forms in different contexts. And it's holistic. It sees economic processes as interdependent with other forms of social relations. We'll talk more about these connections through the course, but it's important to think holistically and socially about economic activity. Economic activities are embedded in the wider array of activities that make up a society, including social life, the environment, religion, and politics. Therefore, when we think economic anthropology, we think social. Here's an outline of some of the key points we'll touch on in this presentation. We'll look at human-environment interactions, key food production systems, including hunting and gathering or foraging, the domestication of plants and animals, different agricultural systems, pastoralism, and industrialism. We'll then turn briefly to the globalization of the environment. We humans modify and adjust our natural environments. We live in relationship or interaction rather than adapting to natural environments. Humans interact both physiologically and genetically with their environments. Humans have populated every terrestrial space on Earth, and the total human population is massive, far more than comparatively sized animals. Let me make a few points about the environment and how we relate or interact with it. First, The environment includes resources that we can take advantage of to fulfill our material needs and wants. Second, each environment poses problems that people try to solve or overcome. Problems include resource scarcity, excessively high or low temperatures, parasites and diseases, rainfall variability, and deficient soils, among others. Third, our need for resources and the challenges posed by our environment require us to work together and organize ourselves to acquire resources and solve problems efficiently. Acquiring resources and coping with problems in the environment involves three kinds of human cooperation. First, division of labor refers to the patterned ways in which productive tasks are divided among lines of gender, sex, age, skill and knowledge, interest, and other criteria. Second, since cooperation is often more efficient and enjoyable than working alone, human groups develop patterns of cooperation. For example, net fishing may be more productive if people work together. Working in a field may be more enjoyable if others are around. Third, groups develop patterned ways of allocating resources among individuals, families, and other kinds of social units. At the broadest level, anthropologists have categorized human-environment relationships into four major categories based on how people acquire produce, especially At the broadest level, anthropologists have categorized human-environment relationships into four main categories based on how people acquire or produce food to meet their material needs and wants. First, hunting and gathering or foraging, in which people exploit the wild plants and animals in their territory for food. Second, agriculture, in which people intentionally plant, care for, and harvest for food and other uses. Third, herding or pastoralism, in which people tend, breed, and harvest livestock and livestock products for food, trade, and other uses. And fourth, industrialism, in which people convert the energy in fossil fuels such as coal, oil, and natural gas, as well as other energy sources such as solar, wind, and atomic energy to increase levels of material consumption and profits for private industries. Let's take a look at each of these human-environment relationships a bit more in depth. Hunter-gatherers or foragers get their food from collecting wild plants and hunting or fishing. By definition, foragers do not produce their own food by growing crops or raising domesticated animals. However, many foragers do control or improve the resources in their environments in other ways. For example, they might burn grasslands during the dry season, which allows them to hunt game, but also improves growth of the grasses once the rains return. Compared to other food production systems, hunter-gatherers live lightly on the land, partly because their populations were small, but they did affect their environments. Until the domestication of plants and animals about 10,000 years ago, foraging was the dominant way our species survived. In foraging societies, the division of labor is usually by gender and age. The women generally gather, while younger men do most of the hunting. Foragers maintain high mobility, so they can move to food and water sources as needed. They also tend to have few material possessions, what they can carry as they move across the landscape. At a given camp, people gather and hunt local resources over a period of days or weeks, gradually eating their way out of the area. Then it's time to move to a new site. In arid environments, they must balance food and water needs. To exploit plants and animals efficiently, most foragers adjust the sizes of their living groups according to seasonal availability and abundance of the resources they need. Foragers frequently live in small, flexible, mobile, kin-based groups called bands. Members cooperate in producing food and other products and usually share rights to wild resources of a given territory. Foragers generally value equality in possessions and social status. Food and possessions are often distributed amongst the entire group, so no one individual can hoard resources. Decisions are made collectively, often by talking through a problem until consensus is reached. In other words, it's difficult for one member to impose his or her will on the group. As Wang Hung ironically told Richard Lee, "Of course we have headmen. In fact, we are all headmen. Each one of us is headman over himself." Finally, foragers often have loose attachment to specific territories and flexible rights to resources. This means that visitors are usually allowed to visit and forage in another band's territory. If you try to enforce your rights when food is abundant by excluding others, those same others are likely to exclude you when the tables are turned. This map shows the principal regions of foragers at the time of first contact with Europeans. Note that even at first contact, foraging had already significantly contracted across the planet. In his famous essay, The Original Affluent Society, Marshall Sahlins makes 4 key points. First, foragers are not so bad off. Second, desire is a cultural construct, not human nature. Third, civilization produces poverty. And fourth, there is more than one strategy for meeting wants. I'll touch on 2 here, points 1 and 3. First, foragers aren't so bad off. In the past, and even today, it's been taken for granted that primitive humans are worse off than civilized humans because they can barely meet their needs. 17th century philosopher Thomas Hobbes considered what he called life in a state of nature in the following terms. In such condition, there is no place for industry, no culture of the earth, no account of time, no arts, no letters, no society, and the life of man is nasty, solitary, poor. 17th century philosopher Thomas Hobbes considered what he called life in a state of nature in the following terms. In such condition, there is no place for industry, no culture of the earth, no account of time, no arts, no letters, no society, and the life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. 20th century anthropologist Melville Herskovits thought that foragers had to work so hard just to eat that there was no time for anything else. He writes, "Constantly on the move, in search of food, they clearly lack the leisure hours for non-subsistence activities of any significance. To them, adequacy of production meant physical survival, and they had little surplus or products or time." But Sahlins, drawing on the research of Richard Lee and others, came to the opposite conclusion, that in fact, hunter-gatherers work fewer hours, they enjoy more leisure time, and they make do with less stuff. Sahlins also argued that civilization produces poverty. No forager is hungry unless all foragers are hungry. With agriculture came surplus and hierarchies of haves and have-nots. Poverty is a social relationship between those who have more and those who have less. It arrives with the development of surplus, leisure, and the division of labor. This means that foragers only become poor when they were subjugated by others and incorporated into larger social, economic, and political systems. We'll learn more about poverty and social